So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the very special discussion we're having today. Stories of resilience, stories from the Northern Rivers. My name is Dr. Michelle Maloney. I'm one of the co-founders of the New Economy Network Australia and also the Australian Earth Laws Alliance. And both organisations are really very pleased to have our beautiful speakers today talking about their experiences through the devastating floods earlier this year and the ongoing impacts today. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge country. I'd like to acknowledge the elders emerging past and present from the Turrbal Yagara peoples. I live here in North Brisbane on the beautiful lands of those remarkable peoples. I'd like to acknowledge not just the people, but the country, and perhaps everyone has probably rushed here to their webinar from something else at work. Invite you to take a big deep breath, think about where you are, where you live, work, play, the plants, the animals, the beautiful ecosystems that are all around you and that support us and our life. When we acknowledge country, it's acknowledgement of First Nations peoples, but also acknowledge the impact of colonisation and the ongoing legacy of my people's culture, the Irish English, and what we've been doing on this continent. And today's conversation is very pertinent to that in the light of climate change and the devastation that people have been experiencing through exacerbated environmental conditions. So in a moment, I'll briefly introduce our speakers, but first a bit of housekeeping. What we're going to aim for today is about a 10-15 minute talk from our three speakers, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. If you have any questions that pop into your mind as our speakers speak, please just write them into the chat. And I would like to acknowledge my wonderful helpers here today, Rhiannon Hardwick from the New Economy Network Australia, and Christina Myers from the Australian Earth Laws Alliance. Rhiannon and Christina will look after our questions and Q&A later in our session. So if you've never heard of NENA, the New Economy Network Australia is one of Australia's sort of only spaces for ordinary folks across multiple sectors and different spaces of work and play to come together and talk about, discuss and debate what our economic systems should look like. If you're interested in NENA's work, I might get Rhiannon to pop the website details into the chat. If you've never heard of us before, please do look up NENA, consider becoming a member, and definitely join some of our upcoming events, everything from wellbeing economics to wellbeing budgets to the NENA Housing Week, and discussion of how we can change the story around our continent's economy. But enough from me. Our speakers today, Susie Russell, Rena Frohman, and Kashmir Miller. Hello, lovelies. They're going to share with us their stories, and I'll let them introduce themselves in a much more effective way than I can. So we might hand over to you, Susie, first. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you would like to unmute, I will pin you so folks can see you. How are you, Susie?
I'm very well, thank you, Michelle. Thank you for having me. I'm on Widjabul Wyabul country today in sunny Lismore.
Yes, and I can see in the background one of the amazing community responses to the floods, which we'll let you talk about now. So Susie Russell, thank you so much. We'd love to hear your story.
Okay, thanks very much. Look, I don't live in Lismore. I live about 5 or 6 hours to the south. And when I saw the devastating floods, it was pretty clear to me that there were going to be so many people who were going to need everything. And I felt like I needed to help, and I wasn't sure what I could do to help. But then over the couple of days after the floods, it became clear when I saw a message from a friend saying, "We're hungry, there's no food." It became clear that one of the things that we could do would be to organise some food and set up a soup kitchen. So that effort morphed into what we have called Trees Not Bombs. This which you can see its sort of current iteration under the tree behind me. Trees Not Bombs was a sort of recognition that what this catchment needs is a lot more trees. That part of the reason why it's flooded so badly is because of the more than a century of tree removal, which is ongoing. and particularly alongside creeks and rivers, there's been sort of serious sort of removal of streamside vegetation. And as well, we were setting up at a time when the war in the Ukraine had just started, and where there was a lot of chest beating going on from the government at the time about, billions more for defence. So there's lots of money for bombs and submarines and weapons and those sort of things, but there's nothing. It's just piddling amounts for catchment repair. So by calling ourselves Trees Not Bombs, it was sort of an effort to try and reiterate the message, if you like, whenever anyone talked about us, that part of our problem that is ongoing and is not easy to fix and will take decades is that we have a serious lack of trees, and that we spend way too much money on weapons manufacturing, and we have our priorities all wrong. So we basically, with a few friends, we gathered gear over a few days. We organised some bulk food purchases of dry goods and vegetables, had a little crowd fund to pay for some of that, and came up here to Lismore to set up and start cooking food. And I have to say, for the first few weeks we were here, I think it rained nearly every day. The amount of rain was quite overwhelming. Fortunately, we have the big old marquee that you can see in the background. It's had seen better days, but to everyone's amazement has actually held up. And we set up not far from here and proceeded to sort of serve food to people who had lost everything, all their clothes, all their belongings, in many cases their houses, their pets, their confidence. And what they really appreciated was that we were somewhere dry where they could get a hot, healthy meal. There were sausage sizzles out there on the streets, but in terms of of actual hearty meal with vegetables and all those kind of things, we were about the main place where you could sit down and have a meal. And so it was clear that what people needed as well was an opportunity to talk about their stories. They needed somewhere where they could connect with people, somewhere where they could meet. That all those things had been taken away. There were no cafes, there were no meeting places, there were no dry places to sit and talk. And there were just so many people needing to share their experiences. And it was every conversation really in those first few weeks was, what happened to you? How did you survive? How did you get here? Where have you been living since? What are you doing? Are you staying? Are you going? And so it's been and then of course after about, we'd been on the ground for about 3 weeks, it flooded again. And, that was a truly sort of incredible experience for everybody. And for us, we had to completely pack up our whole setup and take it away on trailers and utes. And the area where we had set up completely flooded, like it was under 4 or 5 feet or, metre and a half of water. And we had to wait till the waters went down. And then as soon as we felt like we could get back on the site, we came and we set up in this slightly higher position under this magnificent fig tree that you can see in the background. And for the last couple of months have been continuing to provide those things, which is both nourishment for body and soul. But what's become really clear is that, there were people who always fell through the cracks. And of course, now those cracks have widened into massive chasms. And, there is no drop-in centre. The other soup kitchens that used to operate in Lismore aren't yet operating. One of the big ones, an old hotel at the Winsome, was completely flooded. They're going to reopen, but it's going to take another couple of months still. So, there really is a sort of massive problem of a lack of housing, lack of all kinds of housing, lack of permanent housing, lack of temporary housing, lack of casual housing for homeless people, and the need to be able to connect people to the services they need to try and help them deal with the trauma. And yeah, so I mean, we've become a bit of a gravitational point, I suppose, where we're now seeing that we've got a lot of people who would have fallen, who were already falling through the cracks of society, gathering here because it's sort of a relatively safe place, and all those needs are becoming really obvious. And one of the things that's really amazed me is that the government's disaster response had no provision whatsoever for feeding people. And that's what is, I find, the most shocking, is that ourselves, the Koori Kitchen, the Koori Mail, the hub down there, which has also been doing free food, some volunteer groups, like particularly there was a group from the Sikh community that came early on and handed out great vegetarian foods and takeaway packaging. There are a couple of people cooking from home who take away food, send meals around to people who lost their kitchens, obviously don't have the capacity to prepare and cook food, and there's still thousands of people in that situation. But there is no provision for feeding people in the government plan. And of course, all the supermarkets were wiped out in the centre of town, all the food shops, all the fruit shops. And many people lost their cars. The nearest supermarket was up the hill, a few kilometres away. It's very crowded. There was a shuttle bus, but of course carrying your shopping home was difficult, and you had to get to the shuttle bus. So it's one of those massive holes in the disaster response, is this idea that people now are getting some sort of mobile home things are being set up. But I mean, we're 3 months after the disaster, and a lot of these are really basic things, like how do people feed themselves and how do they get shelter, haven't been dealt with adequately. And the issue of food is something that I haven't seen any of the official response deal with at all. And anyway, so thank goodness there's some amazing community people around here to assist with the volunteer effort to bring us pre-prepared food to come and help, and come and help in all the things that are required. But it's a really sad indictment of where we are as a society, that we have so little preparedness to deal with the kind of disasters that increasingly communities are facing. That's it from me.
Thank you so much, Susie. Very powerful words. Look, we're going to have Q&A at the end of each of our speakers, but I was wondering if you'd like to share with us any way that those of us who are high and dry can contribute or support finances or other things to you and your work and others in your area. Did you want to mention a website or a Facebook page?
Look, I think at this stage, I mean, we are at the point where we're talking about, we're having a conversation this week really about packing up this particular little effort, because it's been 3 months and it's got to the point where we can't sustain it as volunteers, and also where some of the social problems are overwhelming us.
Yeah.
And making it more difficult for people to deal with. But the Koori Kitchen and the Koori Mail are both needing support, and Resilient Lismore, the organisation that has been organising volunteers to clean houses and support people and do all those things, they are both very worthwhile places for people to give their money. So, definitely the Koori Mail and Resilient Lismore are the places in town I would suggest that would be very helpful.
I'm sure many of us, including me, gave money to different causes at the very beginning, but we'd love to continue to support you. Susie, thank you so much for all your incredible work for 3 months. For those of us who felt quite helpless watching others in places, it's really wonderful to know that folks like yourself literally pulled up camp and started to help. So well done and thank you. All right, we'll come back to Susie. She's not going anywhere unless she's called off to urgent business. I'll now very happily introduce Rena Frohman. We've been really lucky to be, Susie, I'm just going to unpin you. If you do need to do anything, stay with us, but you're not under complete scrutiny right now, just so you know. We've had the great pleasure of working with Rena Frohman as one of the coordinators at the Yunus Centre of this year's and last year's NINA short course, Building a Wellbeing Economy, Foundations for Learning and Practice. So we were really pleased when Rena was willing to share with us what's been going on in her world since the floods and all of the things that she's been involved with since then. So over to you, Rena. Thank you for sharing your story.
Hello, everybody. And thank you, Michelle. I'm calling in from Bundjalung country in Skinner's Head, but I'm one of the many who are in temporary accommodation. So I'm going to talk about my community that I go back to 2 or 3 times a week as our house is being rebuilt in Evans Head, New South Wales. And Evans Head is about 25 minutes south of Ballina and about 45 minutes away from Lismore. We're downstream. And I'll show you a picture because I've got a little PowerPoint of just some photos and share our story. And just, it's an amazing kind of concept that we've all been through the very similar kind of experiences. So let me just get this set up and everybody can start. So Evans Head is a small community of 3,000, and that's the Evans River. And during the first flood response, we were completely cut off for the 2 roads that lead into Evans Head, and our nearby communities are called Broadwater and Woodburn. And you may have read about them in the national news because they're on the Richmond River and they were completely inundated. So at the very beginning of the first flooding, we were accepting actual rescues. So a lot of the people in Evans have jet skis and little tinnies, and they went out through the cane fields and actually rescued people from their roofs when things were getting quite dire. And then the helicopters would drop people into the football field, and we had 3 evacuation centers set up. So this is what Evans River looked like. We were cut off. South Evans had no access to the main Evans for 12 days. And so there were a few people who could ferry their tinnies across to get food. And Susie, you're right, food is a huge issue. So on day 3, we were actually cut off from everybody. We couldn't get anybody in except for helicopters, and we started rationing food by day 10. Again, issues with power outages, but more importantly were the people who were being rescued. And these are the dramatic stories of people being picked up off their roofs by the helicopters or in tinnies and brought to Evans Head with nothing that was going on. No phones, no shoes, and needing some quick responses. And about day 10, and I'm just a community member, so just like all community members, you kind of pick up and you help out, and we're helping out with food and bedding and clothing, and we were just looking at what reserves we had. And what happened was that there was a call out on Instagram and social media, and I think this was the first truck that arrived when the actual I think it was 10 days. It was about 10 days when the first trucks could get through. So that was our first petrol. We were on petrol rationing, no bread, no milk, and they all arrived. But this came from Tamworth, and we received a phone call that said, "Hey, we've got donations coming in from Tamworth." And we're like, "Great, where do we put them?" Because Susie, you're right, it was still raining. We would get these moments of blue sky. And we quickly had an emergency meeting, and everybody was so focused on rescues at that point. Nobody was really focused on donations. And we realized that we had to find a place really quickly. So Kira Lee, who's not with us today, but I need to acknowledge Kira Lee, said, "Oh, I have a storage shed out at the industrial estate. You can just use my shed to store this stuff." But what happened is it wasn't one truck. it was 10 trucks. And then within 24 hours, we had something like 45 trucks circling Evans Head with drivers calling us and saying, where do we dump this? And literally they were just coming, and they had been driving for 24 hours. And it was everything from perishable food to amazing gum boots and everything. It was all thrown in together. And as a community, we were like, oh, what do we do? So luckily, one of the people who runs Camp Konoina said, I have a key to the airport hangar out at Evans Head. So within 2 weeks, this is what the airport hangar looked like. Meanwhile, Kirli's shed was already full. We had reached capacity. At 2 weeks, the Army came in and helped us build these shelves that had been donated from somebody. And we completely filled this airport hangar. None of it was sorted. We didn't know what was in the boxes. And we, as a community, and this is where I think the community was amazing, we pulled together and we created, this is still before, this is just after the first flood. So we created a database, we bought some money for a text thing, and we said, hey, we need help sorting, we need help distributing. And then within 4 weeks, 24 hours before the start of the second, we came together and we had a quick discussion about how do we distribute all of these amazing donations and how do we deal with this? Because people were still being brought in and they were saying, I need clothing for my children. I need men's clothing. I need shoes. And they couldn't all go out to the airport hangar, and they couldn't go to Kirli's shed because it was just impossible for transportation. And we were sending stuff to the evacuation centers, but it was really a community coming together and saying, what do we do? There were no leaders, and it was Kirli Strong who said, let's create a shop. And so Tommy, who owns Evans Head Kitchen, our Chinese restaurant, said, oh, I have a spare shop on Oak Street. You can have that. And so 24 hours before the start of the second rain, my brother was visiting from the States. We all ended up in the shop cleaning things up. And we said, okay, we'll have a pop-up shop, which is shop for free or shop for good. And the idea was we would bring as much of this as we could. Oak Street's right in the middle of Evans Head. It was right near the food hub. It was central. So we knew that everybody could get there. And it was all volunteer based. And then it started to rain again, as Susie's already mentioned. So at this point, the shop's been running since, I think it was March 25th was our opening day. And we've had over 150 volunteers from the community, from Broadwater, from Woodburn, from New Italy. And it's just been volunteer coordination. And I'm just one of the volunteers speaking today. And we had sorting teams out at the shed, out at the hangar, and we had volunteers running the shop. And Susie, it's exactly what you were saying. It wasn't just a place to come and get things. We had toys for kids, we had nappies, we had everything. It was a place for the community to come together and help each other. And often what happened in that shop were the volunteers were flood impacted like me, and there were local communities. Everybody kind of just joined into that shop and told stories. So there was a place to come and connect, as well as get much needed clothing. With 1 week into the shop, we had an incredible experience of just so many heartwarming stories. And the Evans Head community volunteers were feeling really, really connected. And so we set up a little Facebook page. And the idea was that anybody could walk in and take anything they wanted, because we felt the donations were coming from around Australia for this purpose. And we took our donations down to Woodburn when the Woodburn McGeary shed opened, and we took it out to Broadwater Community Hub, and then Bunga Walban opened. And we started trying to distribute as much as we could to the more remote and regional areas. Because one thing we noticed was that Lismore and Ballina were getting a lot of media attention, and there was more in place. Lismore had more experience, but Evans Head had no experience. We had no disaster emergency rescue plan. We were completely shocked. It was just like, whoa, we've never been here. We've never done this. We had never had anything in place. So everything we did was just kind of flying by the seat of our pants, hoping we were doing the right thing. And one of the things that we recognized was that the community members in Bunga Walban, New Italy, Riley's Hill, Broadwater, and Woodburn were really, really impacted, but weren't getting the help. And that's part because it took a long time for the water to recede. So we still have, members just getting into their homes in Bunga Walbam because the roads were so disrupted by the water. And then the second water, you would get bogged going in. So they're kind of like, 6 weeks behind everybody else. So we really wanted to remember the people who were more remote in those areas as well. So at this point, we were very, very concerned about transparency. And as a community, we had this tin in the shop, and we did everything openly and transparently. So people could donate if they wanted to donate, or they didn't have to donate. And we would open the tin together and we would count all of the change. And I think at this point, that was $3,000 raised about a month and a half ago. We're up to about $1,600. And what we agreed, an extra 1,600. So we have about 4,600 in our little kitty. And what we agreed as a community is that as Woodburn and Bunga Walbam and New Italy people called out for things, we would go purchase those things for them from the donations. So people needed heaters, some people needed mosquito coil, so we would go out and shop for them and bring it to them. And it was just a really, really fast, agile way of responding to community needs. We're not a registered charity, we're just a community group that's working. Part of the issue that came out of this, and you can see on the other photo, is that many of the donations we received were not fit for purpose. And we had a really long talk about the pop-up shop, and we wanted it to be high quality or new donations or things that we would use ourselves. So that meant sorting through. And unfortunately, everything you're seeing in the bags, our sorting team has gone through it 2 times, and we've got 4.5 cubic meters of textiles that are not appropriate for distribution. So we've already gotten rid of 4.5 cubic meters of linens and towels, and we used them for dog towels, we used them for cleaning up, and then this quality of towels was just ripped and shredded and stained, and nobody wanted them for good purposes. And the clothing that's in these boxes are in the same shape. So that's kind of, as a community, what we're looking at now is we don't want to add to landfill. We don't want to create another environmental problem. So we're looking for ways to distribute. So that's where we are after 4 months. And our next steps are that we are completely community run. Some of us are working full time like me and trying to do this. And we have gotten to the point where we have distributed almost as much as we can distribute, and we'll close up shop on the 30th of June. And our extra donations will go to charities that have also been flood impacted in Lismore, for example, who want that. And so the good donations will stay within the Northern Rivers area. And then we'll work on phase 2, which is what do we do with the donations that aren't good enough to distribute? And how do we do that without creating a second disaster for our landfills? But one thing I just wanted to say was that this was a completely grassroots community energy. Kiralee and I didn't know each other at all, and none of the volunteers who were kind of behind the scenes, we all met during the evacuation center stage. And it was all very much a crisis driven, how do we respond, Susie, just like you were saying. And the 150 plus community members who have come in to volunteer are absolutely gems. We can't even express how many hours, how much petrol, how much energy they have contributed to this. And there's a really good lesson about donations that we're learning, is that there's some fantastic intentions after a natural disaster to send donations because people are calling out for donations. But the intention that carries through is a huge onus for the community. If we hadn't reacted on day 6 when the first truck came through, most of the donations would have been left out in the rain because it rained for another 3 weeks and they were in cardboard boxes. And so we were getting calls at 9 o'clock at night with lorries coming in from Tamworth, coming in from Melbourne, saying, where do you want us to drop this? And if Kiralee and the airport hangar, if we didn't have the keys to those padlocks, those materials would have been dropped outside. And then it would have just gone straight to landfill because they would have just been ruined. So what we're trying to learn now and thinking about lessons that we can learn is how do we channel, how do we create a better donation pathway so that the intention to donate works for what we need in time. So at the moment, we're dealing with 10 pallets of excessive hand sanitizer, which are in little plastic bottles, because there was a call out for hand sanitizer, but we have 10 pallets and nobody needs it and nobody wants it. But what people do want is what Susie's talking about, is like heating, or they want gyprock, or they want things to start building that make their houses winterproof. So it's just a matter of us learning this lesson and how do we make it better. And also acknowledging what I think Susie rightly said is that in the absence of government planning and in the absence of emergency planning, there's a huge assumption that the communities are going to step up and do this. And I'm really, really grateful and thankful for the community. I'm in awe of the communities around us who have just given their heart and soul to this. But I think we can do better. And that's where I'll leave it.
Thank you so much. That was really amazing, Rena. My heart really goes out to you guys. It's just so awful. I think we were all watching the TV if we weren't down there when it was all happening. And it's so important for us to share your stories and to hear about what's still going on right now. I know that, again, we're going to have questions at the end, but again, can I extend an invitation to you, Rena, to sort of promote or give a plug to any areas, any groups that you think those of us who want to support again or want to help with, you know, because a lot of these stories are not on the mainstream media anymore. So yeah, any suggestions?
I agree with the Courier Mail for Lismore, and for our area, Give It, which is the New South Wales Resilience website. If you go on to Give It, there's an actual ask. And I should mention, I was talking to Kira Lee about this. And one of the things is if you, for example, the Woodbourne Community Hub has a Facebook page and they have an ask page. And so they explicitly say, we need size 12 men's socks. And you can nominate to say, okay, I'll buy those. Yeah. Or a family will say, we need, you know, this much for our kids. And you can sponsor that and actually do that through Give It in New South Wales. And for us, we think that kind of matching is really, really effective. The other kind of effective thing that has happened is that people have given cash donations to petrol stations in the area, because petrol, being a regional area, we spend a lot of money on petrol costs. And so, for example, we have somebody who drives his ute all the way out to Bungawalba, New Italy, Lismore, Casino, Kyogo. These are big drives to drop things off. But he's a pensioner, so we use some of our donated money to pay for his petrol because we just think it's unreasonable. So things that are really, really practical like that can help.
That's great. Thank you so much, Rena. And Rena, since you are at your computer, if there are any of those links that Give It, anything in particular, do pop them in the chat. I'm sure people are very keen to know. So thank you again. And I will unpin you so I can bring Kashmir in, but do stick around. We'll be having some more conversation in a moment. So Kashmir Miller, come on down. I'm pinning you. Thank you so much for joining us, Kashmir. You are on mute. So if you'd like to unmute yourself, we'd love to hear about your story and what's been happening in your community.
Sure. Thanks, Michelle. And thank you so much to everybody from all around coming and listening to our stories. I think just even preparing this, a few things that I've got to say has been therapeutic in a way, because so many of us here in the Northern Rivers, in the flood impacted regions, haven't really had the time or the energy to process what has really happened to us as a community. And we've just been running on go, go, go mode. And so I think that there's a lot of, as beneficial as this may be to other people to listen to, I think that we can all agree that talking about what we've been through is beneficial for us as well. So my name's Kashmir. I live and work on unceded Bundjalung country of the Widjabul people. And I am in Lismore, and I've lived in Lismore my entire life, right in the middle of it. And so floods wasn't exactly a new thing to me. In 2017, in the last major flood, I was in the middle of my year 12 exams, and we got sent home in the middle of the exam because our town was flooding and people had to go home and help their families to evacuate. So it wasn't exactly a shocking thing at first, but it became very prevalent to very many that this was not going to be like that at all. And it was quite a whole different situation. And like many as well, from those far away, you do feel a sense of helplessness, and for me, survivor's guilt, because I was one of the lucky ones who live high on a hill, so I could definitely see out my window all of the carnage that was happening, but myself very safe and relatively undamaged, except for my workplace being destroyed, but thankfully my home was safe. And also a sense of guilt that many felt around not being able to give as much as you feel like you can give or want to give, especially in those first few days, because I don't have a car or a tinny or anything like that. And I'm not too good with the physical labor side either, as much as I'd like to try. So I think throughout the process, many of us found that there are so many more ways to help and to contribute than just the physical side of cleaning houses and that initial emergency response of saving people from their houses, because like Rena and Susie have both said, there are many elements to a disaster recovery. It is a marathon, not a sprint, so all different skills are extremely necessary, which I will get into a little bit. So just from my experience on the actual day, I know that many of us did not really sleep that night, as it became to be clear that this was going to be more than just a levee-topping flood. It was going to be a multiple metre record-breaking flood, and we really did not know what to expect. And what we really recognise as the heroes of that first response was the locals on their tinnies who saved hundreds of lives. And the SES were amazing as well, but what became the most valuable was the knowledge from locals of their neighbourhoods and their communities, that they know who was still in their homes. They knew who would be elderly in their house and would be unable to get out. And this was more than just rescuing people off their roofs. In many places, it included having the tools available to literally cut their walls of their houses out, because many were physically unable to even get onto their roof. So they would be standing very deep in water, which is a really difficult thing to imagine, but it's important for us to realize how brave a lot of those locals really were and took it among themselves. And I know that some even just had to leave their own flooding house to go and save their neighbours, because it became a matter of life and death, where we had to put our personal possessions aside. So in the days and weeks after the flood was when we saw the full effect of the localisation and the community pulling together. For me, I found my skills to be used out on the digital side of coordination, which is extremely important, as we've all discovered as well, to have those people with more technical skills around Facebook. And I'm somebody who kind of dreads the necessary evil of Facebook, but we did find it to be an extremely valuable resource in that response. So for me, that meant moderating a Facebook group that we had called Resilient Lismore, that was previously known as Helping Hands in the Last Flood. And that looked like coordinating volunteers who were reaching out, who wanted to give help, but also coordinating those who were reaching out in need of help and being able to match the two together where they best suited. And in the few days directly after the flood, that was mostly just through providing phone numbers and names through Facebook. But then as we realized when the floodwaters went down and that there were thousands of buildings that needed to be cleaned, we needed a higher volume of responses. So many of us got trained to use the phones and systems online that would register a request, and then people would call on the phone and we could assign them to those different requests and understand how many people were needed, and also some different request forms for particular skills like surveyors and builders and people who were able to remove mold and things like that. And yes, and we also, of course, had to be trained with Lifeline before we could do that, because the trauma was really ripe within the community and all of those who we were speaking with, understandably, and that were some really difficult conversations to have. So we were grateful for that training, which was unfortunately very necessary. And we were doing this in Southern Cross University, which was thankfully high and dry. And in the months since the flood, we've seen that place become pretty much anything but a university. Like, the university is the last thing that it really was. It's now a home to 2 schools, different, a high school and a primary school, and or an evacuation centre for multiple times through the first and the second flood, and also somewhere where people could collect food and resources. So we really just had to work with the available space that hadn't been contaminated or flooded, and we were very grateful for that communal space as well. And in the evacuation centres, there were countless ways that they needed help, which included, of course, cooking meals, but also things like looking after pets, because your pets, of course, have to come with you to the university with you, and sorting through the mountains of donations, because unfortunately, like Rena said, people, unfortunately, I feel, were taking advantage of this situation to get rid of all of their junk that they don't want, and they just said, oh look, we'll just give it to them despite whether they actually need it or not, which was unfortunate. And one of the other issues that we had to deal with in the evacuation centres was COVID, because nobody was thinking about COVID in the evacuation centres, but it was still there. And just to add pain to the situation is that there were outbreaks within the evacuation centres that we basically could do nothing about. And for me, one of the responses that I was involved with as well was organising a youth group at the evacuation centre to give kids a space to just peacefully draw and chat and play with the other kids in the evacuation centre, because it was a difficult thing for parents to go through with young children. And also it gave the opportunity to give the parents a bit of a respite so that they can plan their next move and how they're going to really move along with their family and their kids, and where their kids are going to go to school, because many, if not most, of the schools were destroyed mostly. And another interesting element of community response was kind of the, I guess, breakdown of the economy throughout the Northern Rivers, in the sense that we very much became sort of in a post-apocalyptic, like post-capitalist world, where we didn't have power or internet a lot of the time. So credit cards and internet banking, and that became impossible and just redundant. So we didn't really have money for a long time. Everything around us was pretty much free or gifted or exchanged, which was really kind of beautiful in a way to see that even when everything is taken away from us, we see what really matters, and what, when you strip all of the material goods of the world away, that we are left with community and connection and generosity, which was just such a shining part of this, and a lot of light in the dark of the way, like we've heard from people like Susie and Rena, who were just led this amazing community response that saved many lives, even past the initial threat of danger, because so many relied on that sense of community, that they weren't completely isolated, which I know that I'm very grateful for as well. And one of those incredible groups as well, of course, was Koori Mail, which is really important to recognise the importance of Indigenous knowledge of the land and Indigenous connection with their community. And they cared for everybody in this time. Anybody who's been to the Koori Mail Centre in Lismore in those months after the flood knows that there really was nothing like it. And they just, they coordinated such a large amount of donations and cooking multiple meals every day, that people, after a big day of cleaning in their gumboots, could come and just have a chat. And so we're very thankful for them, and also those who came in from interstate and across Australia. And one of those which I helped to organise was Turbans for Australia, who brought multiple truckloads of donations down from Sydney and offered to cook big batches of meals as well. And another thing that I had an individual perspective on in the post-flood recovery that many tend to neglect, and I'm glad that we didn't neglect this in Lismore at least, was the importance of prioritising places for joy and places for laughter pretty much immediately after the floodwaters went down. This begun because those of us within the art space, I'm an actor myself, knew how important this was. So it was mere days after the first floodwaters went down, we had our first sort of musical event where we saw huge community come together, and we had a bit of a clothes swap for those who needed clothes right then and now that were still in the clothes that they left their homes with on the day. And we had music and dancing and barbecues, and we were down in where the floodwaters were, but mere meters away, and the smell was not nice, and it started raining, which made the smell even worse, but we didn't care because we just knew how essential that was to have a moment to just kind of just have it like connect with each other and have a bit of fun. And for me as well, I was involved in a play, Running Up a Dress, it was called, with the Lismore Theatre Company, and we were scheduled to go on but a few weeks after the flood, and in our theatre, which was thankfully high and dry as well. And we really had to kind of think about this, about whether it's appropriate and whether people would still want to come. And many of our cast and crew as well had their homes completely destroyed as well. And in the end, we just decided that it was actually the most important time to do this, that we really had to do it for the community. And we added an extra show to be a flood fundraiser. And we had full houses every single night of that show, despite many people in the audience being impacted by the floods dramatically. And we had people crying and just being so thankful that we had done this. And in our second week of performances, the second flood hit, and we actually had to have one of our actors hitch a ride with the SES across the floodwaters to get to the theatre. So the show really must go on in all circumstances, which was kind of, yes, amusing, and we were grateful for the SES in that aspect, even if it was for a slightly more trivial reason that we were using their valuable resources. And we also used the arts as a way to raise money. Another event that I helped with was called Swamp Thang, and it was a very groovy, like disco type event where we raised money for the LGBTQIA+ community who had lost their homes. And it was, again, in a previously water-filled, slightly unpleasant smelling building where we all wore our best swamp gear and really just kind of like took the piss out of ourselves and everything that was going on, which is just exactly what we needed. And of course, not everybody is quite up to that straight away, but I think for those of us who do really rely on that sense of play and laughter in the worst of times to get us through, I think that that can also be a life-saving service that you can provide in recovery, and it needs to continue happening, as we've seen with the One from the Heart concert, where we had acts from all across Australia come and perform a big free concert in Lismore where over 10,000 of us gathered and in our gumboots, and it was one of the worst smelling concerts I've ever been to. And I've been to some pretty bad smelling concerts, but again, it didn't matter. It was absolutely awesome. So there's just a few kind of sort of some light and some dark things that came through, and we all had such different perspectives. My perspective was quite heavily shaped as well by being a federal candidate for the election in the electorate of Page, which includes Lismore and Evans Head and a lot of the really impacted areas. And I'm not going to give you a political pitch, don't worry. But I think it is worth noting that from my perspective of listening to what sort of responses the community wanted from the government, it was mostly that they wanted to be listened to, and they wanted to tell the government and their representatives the response that they wanted to see and the options that they wanted, and for it not to be dictated to them. So this meant that people wanted to have the option to rebuild if they wanted to. And if they don't want to, they want to have the options for land swaps with the government and ways to move away, because for many of them, sleeping in their house is impossible when it's raining, because they are just, of course, living with, you know, post-traumatic stress that will just be exasperated every time it rains, which I think it is completely fair and logistical that we need to give people an option to get out of that. And yes, and mostly what people wanted was to be listened to, what I found. And yes, unfortunately, many didn't feel listened to in that time by the government at the time, and we're still not seeing a lot of community consultation at the federal level. So moving forward, I think that's something that really needs to change, that we don't want to be kind of told how we're going to respond, that we want to be part of the discussion.
Thanks.
And also,
yes. It might be a really nice moment to open up discussions, because that's one of my first burning questions. So if unless you've got any final points, we might open it up and bring our Kashmir. That was brilliant. Thank you so much for that broad ranging overview. And I love Swamp Thing. I will think about that fondly. You know, it's terrific to hear about how people could try to keep each other supported in the darkest of times. So well done you.
Thank you.
I'm going to add Susie and Rena, and in a minute I'll bring Rhiannon and Christina to come share. They'll handle questions from you guys, but I've got one or two that I'd love to put to you, as the three of you have been involved in so many community responses. And Kashmir's point just touched on my question, which is governments, the role of government. I mean, one of the reasons that we picked this topic for Localisation Day is, as outsiders or friends watching our friends suffer these terrible floods, this constant discourse, these ideas that the government wasn't prepared, the government didn't have resources, they didn't come in and help us, there was no savior from afar, it was just people helping each other, kind of the same as when we went into lockdown. Would the three of you perhaps just like to make a few comments on how do we move forward from this? Is it about strengthening communities more and more and more, and just giving up on governments getting their act together? Or are there demands we should make of government? And maybe I might start with you, Rena, if you want to think about that. Where to from here in terms of particularly the relationship between communities and government?
Well, we're just thinking about that right now, because we're going to have a thank you to our volunteers. And Kashmir, you know, you'll hear about this through Hannah Beth Luke, who was our teal candidate from Evans Head. But that whole idea of resilience and resilient, and what can we do as communities to start putting together the lessons that we've learned, and how do we bring in multiple stakeholders, including state, local government players, but also organizations like the SES and everybody who should be working together with much, much better communication and coordination. So I think one of the things is that local communities must be listened to, not only because we know the geography and the hydrology, and we know where floods are happening down to the local streets that are not draining properly, to the connections to our First Nations representatives and people who are in our communities who understand the land much better than we do, and how land could be managed much better. We have so much to learn from our community, but we also have to include government. We have to include others, because it's a collective organization. It has to be a collective effort, is what I think. I don't think it can just be grassroots. I think we need policies and we need to work together. So I would love for a much stronger representation of community engagement and community listening to occur. That would be a really good outcome of this. I'll hand over to the others.
Thank you. Susie.
Yeah, look, I think partly the problem is that obviously we have had at a federal level a government for a decade that has been immersed in its own climate denialism, and therefore hasn't been interested or prepared to even consider the disaster scenarios that are upon us. I mean, we saw with the fires, and my community was impacted by the fires. We saw, you know, the fire chiefs and emergency sort of leaders asking, begging for aircraft to be able to do bombing, you know, water bombing and fires early on, and it was completely ignored by the government. The other thing that has had a major impact is the privatisation of government services and the cutbacks in the public service. So where before, if you had a reasonable public service, you could put people to work to, you know, processing applications for assistance and all those sort of things, and people could be moved into departments where there was a need. That has been cut back to such a bare minimum that there isn't the capacity within the system to be able to deal with disasters. So clearly, there are a number of areas where if a government, as the current one does, says that they accept the science of climate change and they accept that we're going to see more of these climate-related disasters, then one thing they can do, obviously, is to start to put funding into those areas. But I do think that communities need to prepare, and I think it's a really worthwhile exercise for local communities to, and maybe this is something again where government could help with some seed funding, but to do some preparedness exercises, like if this happened, what would we do and how would we deal with it? From my point of view, I would like to see a whole lot of little mobile food kitchen type setups that were available that could be towed to, you know, wherever they were needed with a minimum of fuss. It wouldn't be a hard thing to have those kits. They wouldn't cost much. It would make such an enormous difference to communities to be able to sort of set up mobile food bases. And I just want to briefly touch on the issue of communication, because the other thing that happens in a lot of places, particularly in the hills around the Northern Rivers, the phone system went out, the roads were damaged and impassable, and people found themselves unable to communicate and had to walk long distances over rough country to try and find out whether people were okay. And I went to a workshop on the weekend in the Shannon where people were looking at building a CB radio network where people would be able to, and to start that now, to begin basically having an alternative communication system where neighbours are able to check in on neighbours, where you know how far your messages can go, and there's an alternative communication system to be able to check in on people, call for assistance. And it's great to see that the communities up there are starting to build that now, because obviously we can't wait. There will be more disasters. We're not sure what form they're going to take, but it's highly likely, given the weather systems, that we're going to have more flooding in the next 12 months. And so, yeah, people need to prepare.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I think I've just moved myself around accidentally. Kashmir, did you want to respond to my sort of first question about this relationship between communities and government? I'm sure you've got some very good ideas, given you were running as a candidate.
Sure. Well, I think that we need to understand the different ways that both community and government can best help in a response like this, and really hone into that rather than just letting kind of the pieces fall where they do in the time. And that means accepting that there are things that the community can do in disaster recovery much better than the government and government organisations, such as honing in that knowledge of what the community's individual needs actually are. And the thing is that we're seeing right now is that these roles are continuing months past the disaster. And pretty much all of these people are working completely voluntarily, and many have given their entire lives for this. And these skills that they're giving and this time that they're giving is invaluable, and they deserve to be paid for it, really. So I truly think that the government should be investing into community-led organisations such as Resilient Lismore and Koori Mail, so that this can happen long-term and that these essential volunteers can be looked after. And also the government taking responsibility for the things that are completely in their domain and they should be looking after, such as providing temporary and long-term affordable housing and accessible housing in the times when there will be further climate disasters, and accepting them for what they are, which is climate disasters, because only when we accept that will we accept how our future is going to look and we can start preparing for it. Because if we keep calling them 1 in 500 floods or 1 in 100-year floods, then we're never going to be prepared. So I think that's just the most basic first step, is acceptance, so that we can plan based on a model that accepts climate catastrophe and adapts mitigative and adaptive strategies in addition with each other, and accepting that we are already in, this is climate change, it's not the future anymore. And yeah, I think just especially housing is the thing that many community members had to house people for weeks and months at a time, which is not their job to do. It's the government's job to provide housing for people in communities that are impacted by things like floods and fires. And then also, like, yeah, of course, looking after those volunteers and giving them the treatment and payment that they deserve.
Mm. Oh, thank you, Kashmir. Yes, food and housing coming home loud and clear, isn't it? So look, I'd like to hand over now to Rhiannon Hardwick, my partner in crime in the NINA Coordinating Hub, to take over for the Q&A, and Christina Myers will be assisting. So Rhiannon, over to you to discuss if there are any questions lurking in the background. And please, folks, we don't have a lot pouring through on the chat, but we do have a couple that have come through in private messages that the girls will read out. If you have a question, you're also welcome to put your hand up on the screen and actually speak to the humans. You're very welcome to do so.
Yes, thank you, Michelle. And as Michelle said, please do raise your Zoom hand if you'd like to ask a question. Otherwise, I think Christina was keeping an eye on the chat and might have a couple of questions from there. Would you like to pose those, Christina?
Beautiful. So the first question we've got here is, UParel are textile recyclers, Melbourne-based. Could it be worth reaching out to them for delivery support, as usually a high cost for delivery, but otherwise a great upcycle option?
Yeah, it's fantastic. So I'm just going to jump in there because that's one that we've actually investigated. So for the unwanted linens and towels, Blocktex in Logan, Queensland is a new technology where they break down the linens and towels into the plastic pellets, and then they can actually send those to a manufacturer. I think it's Sheridan who will use those plastic micro pellets to create new textiles. So that's a complete circular economy that works. For the unwanted textiles, it's a really hard topic in Australia right now, and one that we're looking at very intensely. So your options are, we can send them to places like Endeavour that will shred them into rags and then use that for rags. We, as a community, we will have to pay for the transport for all of this. So we're looking at a bill of $5,000 to $10,000, depending on where we transport the textiles. And the landfills are now, we don't want to go to landfill, but we would have to pay the tip fees. And I think there was a study that after the bushfires, one community was landed with a $10,000 tip fee for the donations they didn't want. That's not including all the community hours of sorting and trying to distribute. So Kashmir, I totally understand and agree with your idea of being paid, because we just put 30 hours in this week to sorting the last of our donations. Then in terms of Apparel, yes, we've looked at Apparel, we've contacted them, and hopefully they'll reach out to us. It's $10. 10 kilos is $25, and you have to order their cardboard boxes. So when we're talking about, 5.8 or 7.8 cubic meters, we're looking at a bill of about $3,000 to $4,000. And I need to just say that's from the Evans Head, where this tiny community of 3,000. That's not looking at something like the Corrimal, who've reached out to us, the Woodburn. Everybody has unwanted textiles, and we're getting all these messages like saying, what are you doing with your unwanted? So if Apparel were willing to send us a lorry, like 2 semi-trucks, we could fill it from northern New South Wales and send it down to them. They're a great social enterprise, fantastic what they're doing, but paying $25 or whatever it is per 10 kilos, it's not even economically viable. A third option is to send it to Visi, who make cardboard. And they're located in Queensland, and this may be the one we go, and they do waste to energy. So they burn everything, and that goes into their bio mass to produce cardboard boxes. A fourth one is a social enterprise called After, which is in Melbourne, and that takes those clothes and sends it to India for recycling. And they rip apart the clothes, the buttons, the zippers, and then they send it back to Melbourne for high fashion recycling clothes. So there's lots and lots of options. The logistics of it is transport. and storage. And so small communities like ours will end up having to find donated transport. So a trucking company, if anybody knows a trucking company, or we will have to use the donated money that we have from our shop and Rotary and things like that to pay for the transport. So that's our phase 2. And all of those ideas are fantastic. And because we're a community grassroots movement, on July 24th, we're sitting down as a community and determining what do we want to do. And we're balancing volunteer hours, we're balancing petrol costs, basically the cost of transport, and then our carbon footprint. Because one of our missions was that the unwanted textiles do not end up in landfill, and we don't want to go down that path. But we also have to recognize the constraints of just our Evans Head situation, but then the Woodburn, the Broadwater, Courimat, all of these, everybody's looking at us and not saying, what are you doing? But we all want ideas. I would think it's close to 1,000 cubic meters of waste that we would have from the Northern Rivers area at this point.
Thank you, Rena, for that really comprehensive answer to the question. We do have 2 more questions that came through in private messages. So the next one is, how long do you think it'll take for things to be back to normal? Will Lismore or Evans Head ever feel back to normal again?
I can start on this one if you like. So for Lismore, basically, we don't know if things will ever look back to normal or not, because a lot of businesses are unable to decide whether they want to rebuild or not. And we don't know yet if the CBD is a viable place to rebuild. And what is very likely to happen is that businesses will rebuild in the CBD, and we will see another flood next year, because we will probably still be in La Nina then, and we'll still be having a lot of rainfall. So the real end of this, as in it's over, is probably years to come. So basically we need to look at alternative options and consult with businesses and homeowners about whether they do want to take that risk, and understand that that is a valid opinion, and that many places will want to rebuild in their homes. But in the sense of the physical, when all of the shops will be back in some capacity or another, that is still probably years to come.
And for Evans Head, it looks back to normal. I think, Susie, this is what we were talking about, the people who fall between the cracks and the people who were at the end of the social economic spectrum that were already at risk. So if you walk around Evans Head, we perhaps in our little area only had 40 or 50 houses that were severely impacted. So the CBD in Evans Head is thriving. And not only that, because of the accommodation crisis, every single room in Evans Head is completely full, and we're setting up the pods in the football field for temporary accommodation. So there's a buzz going in Evans Head. But if you go down 10 Ks to Woodburn, Broadwater, Riley's, the areas that had the river like Lismore, the exact same thing is, are we going to be able to rebuild those areas? Do the homeowners and do the small businesses have the energy and the resilience in an area that is flood prone? And I think, Kashmir, it's exactly right. How many years, and what are those decisions that people need to make? So, and in Ballina, it feels, and Ballina did get flooded, but that's where I've kind of been living temporarily. It feels like it's thriving. And I know there are neighborhoods in Ballina, I can see them, that have been impacted. But when you go out in Ballina, it feels like it's happening. So it's a really case by case, context based as to where the water was, what kind of water, how the second flood impacted people to affect how long it would take, or whether it can go back to where we were. I don't know, Susie, you're in a different position.
Look, I think that I don't think this community will ever get over it, because I think chances are, I think there's a really good chance with the weather that there will be more flooding in the not too distant future. A lot of people are in denial. They are saying, I've heard people say, I'm never going to see another flood like that in my lifetime. And so I think, that there are there obviously there's the whole spectrum of, but it's very difficult because it's Lismore is a beautiful place when it's not under floodwaters, and for very obvious reasons, people want to be here, but in as far as it being a normal place where you have all of the possessions and soft furnishings and things that are going to get spoiled by floodwaters, it's not really a wise thing to be investing in those things like recarpeting your house. I wouldn't be. So hopefully this Reconstruction Commission will come up with some new housing options and make it affordable for people who can shift their houses, help people to raise their houses, although they're about as high as you can get, really. New forms of construction need to be considered. You know, there's just so many questions, and I think, you know, the big sort of picture behind this is that this is climate change. There are millions of people who are climate refugees already around the world who have lost their homes because of various disasters and catastrophes, and I think we're going to increasingly see these problems. We have people still living in caravans whose places burnt 3 years ago. That problem hasn't been really very well dealt with. And so these things just pile up upon us. And until we as a society realise just how grave the problem is, and realise we need to be on an emergency footing. I mean, we shouldn't be encouraging consumption. We should be talking about how we minimise our consumption. The whole notion of growth needs to change. So anyway, that's sort of considered to be a somewhat radical point of view, but I think the climate is demonstrating that radical approaches are needed right across all of civil society and government to respond to be able to respond adequately to these situations.
Thank you very much, Kashmir, Rena and Susie, for all your insights once again. The next question we have leads on really nicely from this, and that's, do you know of many people who no longer want to live in their region, who want to move away? What are their plans and what do they want to do?
Well, I certainly do know that there are many people who don't want to live in Lismore anymore. As I think Kashmir said, they are traumatised by rain. They really don't want to be anywhere where even there is the slightest possibility of flooding. They feel heartbroken at the idea of leaving the community where they have lived, loved and worked, and their social networks, but they just don't feel safe here anymore. And that then you have that process. And we have, of course, there are thousands of people that are displaced, that are in Brisbane and in Grafton and Casino and in places where they don't have the social networks and the community that they had, and they feel upset and stressed and lonely, and a whole raft of other problems develop as a result of being isolated in that way.
Yeah, I don't really have anything else to add on from that. The fact is that they should be given viable options to move away if they want to, and that is something where the government has lacked so far and that we need to see more of, whether that looks like land swaps or voluntary buybacks. There needs to be those options available.
Thank you, Susie and Kashmir. Is there anything you would like to add, Rena?
I just absolutely wholeheartedly agree with everything that's been said, and have had conversations, hard conversations with friends and community members who are making those decisions now. I think sometimes the decision, it's a financial one. We've got friends who are in their 70s. And it's just too hard. It really is. They just cannot see that long rebuild process. And they just want to be somewhere safe where they can celebrate birthdays, and completely respect that. So they're trying to sell their houses as is, which are stripped out. And then I've had a lot of conversations with younger people who are full of optimism and the idea of building back sustainably with regenerative agriculture and wood burn, at looking at the ways that we can use science and use positive ways of farming to make things work. And even talking about, temporary houses, that, the concept of not having a structure, so that when a natural disaster comes, it's basically, a mini house, but you don't have an attachment to a physical house. Like, change your mind shift. And then the floods come and they leave, but you come back and you keep rebuilding and things like that. So I've heard a lot of different philosophies. And I think one of the things is just listening and respecting where people are, and understanding that everybody's coming to this from a different lens and a different place. And that's what I think is what we need, is some pauses and some deep listening. And how do we as communities support those people who are on those journeys, whether they want to stay, whether they want to go, whether they want to shift the way that we look at land ownership. There's a lot of opportunities here to rethink the way we do things. That's all I've got to say.
Thank you, everyone, for your perspectives, and especially the positive and hopeful ones is nice to hear. We also have a question here from Richard Parsons. He said, I'm sometimes concerned that the increasing focus on resilience shifts responsibility for action from the powerful to the powerless. Any thoughts? Is resilience a useful concept or just a buzzword?
I think that's a really good question to ask, and something that has been discussed in Lismore as well. And I do truly think that in some cases it does shift the focus and the responsibility onto the community, like all of us have discussed, and away from the government, and the fact that we get this, nationwide media coverage of how resilient we are. And I've heard from so many people that do not want to hear that word anymore, because they say, I don't want to be resilient anymore. I want somebody to swoop in and save me, and then I can just crumble and not have to deal with this anymore, which of course is incredibly sad, but incredibly understandable. Like, these people in our communities, they didn't ask to be resilient. The fact is that there was no other choice but to be resilient. So while of course we should be commending their efforts, we shouldn't be acting like, oh wow, they did such a good job, let's let them keep doing it. Like, it can definitely be a way to shift the responsibility onto the people, because they have done an incredible job, but in reality they shouldn't have had to do as good of a job as they did.
Can I just say, I mean, I don't disagree with that, but the flip side of it is that communities have always risen to the moment to look after each other in disasters. There's a fabulous book I just finished reading called A Paradise Built in Hell by Rebecca Solnit, and it talks about a whole series of disasters, starting with the 1906 earthquake in San Francisco, and about how people did do just what has been happening up here, which is that they got together, they rescued people, they set up soup kitchens, they looked after each other, they did all those things, while the official sort of response was entirely lacking. And I think that we do need, I don't think that in the future we can count on governments to look after us. And I think we do need to take responsibility for our lifestyles, which have to a large extent contributed to the climate disaster that we're facing, and that as such we need to be prepared to take responsibility for looking after each other and being prepared. I just can't stress the preparedness enough, because I think that's what's lacking, is that we all to some extent think everything's going to be fine, And it is until it isn't. And then we all wish that we'd taken more time to prepare ourselves for those moments. And I'd really like to see more discussions about how, as communities, we can network and prepare, and how we can then ask governments for the assistance we need to do that better.
And I completely agree. I think that's when I was talking about, like, we need communication between different levels. It can't just be grassroots. It has to be grassroots, working with local governments, working with state, working with federal, working with charities and organizations. It has to be an all-in effort. And one of the things that I realized being a newcomer to Evanston, I've only lived there since 2019. And of course, the COVID pandemic meant that we kind of stayed inside our houses for a long time and we didn't have opportunities to meet. But one thing that this brought out was how many skilled people we have in this area. We have amazing skill sets. And all of a sudden people came out and said, oh, I worked for the United Nations in the Sudan, or I worked as a logistics expert in transport, or I worked, I've got connections to people with helicopters. And finding the strengths within our community. And Susie, you're right. Had we known all of that information beforehand, it would have made the first 3 weeks much, much better. But there's a sense of we have a lot of strengths in this small area. And what we need to do is learn to listen to each other, understand our strengths, and then how do we build this preparation and community effort so that it's much smoother with all the levels of government and all the levels of civil service organizations and the SES. And I think if we're in it together, it'll be a much stronger response rather than just saying, oh, the government does this or the communities do that. I'm much more about let's complement each other, find our strengths. The government can call in the helicopters, which is fantastic. Hey, I have never thought I wanted to live in a helicopter landing pad area. And for those 2 weeks, every time I heard a helicopter, I was cheering. And just to have those resources available when they did come in for food, for medicine, for taking people out of Evans Head who were in emergency medical situations, and for bringing people in who needed to be there. But we as a community, we don't have a helicopter. So I recognize the importance of helicopters and how good they are. And I want to be able to make sure that that communication and those circles of responsibility and caring are much stronger. And the weaving between all of us is much stronger. Because I think the lesson that we've learned is we weren't prepared as well as we should have been. And we can be prepared with just some really good communication and thinking.
Wonderful, thank you all. Just noting that Susie does have to jump off now. Her phone battery is dying, I think. So yeah, thank you so much, Susie, for sharing your stories and perspectives today. We are about to wrap up. I do want to remind everyone, I put in the chat, so this webinar is part of World Localisation Day, which is an initiative run by Local Futures. I put some links in the chat, but I can repost those in a minute. And yeah, the focus around localisation is really how we can localise our economies to strengthen community cohesion and really lead to greater human health and well-being, as well as reducing the effect on the environment. And as we've heard from our speakers today, these local responses are really key. But of course, as our speakers have also said, how can we work with different levels of government to ensure, if we want to call it resilience, or if we want to call it strengthening these relationships and community disaster preparedness. Just one last question though, given Nina's role in this space, we would love to know what you think about how can civil society networks like Nina, how can we help respond and assist people in crisis in the future? Is there a space for organisations like Nina? Rena, would you like to respond?
I think holding panels like this is a great start. I think helping communities get ready. I think providing resources for communities to organize and teaching leadership on how communities can organize. I think there can be a focus on big communities and small communities. I think there's a lot more capacity and capability in big communities, but Nina can also highlight regional areas as well. Kashmir?
Absolutely. Basically starting early before disaster strikes, not waiting for responses afterwards. And that could include things like workshops and, like Rena said, leadership training, and accepting that one size does not fit all when it comes to working with communities, that the needs even of Evans Head and Lismore can be completely different in many ways. So being able to have communications between leaders of communities to understand what they specifically need rather than applying the same response to all communities, I think is super important.
Wonderful, thank you both. So we're going to take this opportunity to get everyone to give a big thank you. So whether that is using your clap emoji on Zoom or just a daggy air clap, thank you so much for sharing your stories today. And yeah, just both the resilience of the communities, although we will need to find a better word for that, but also the joy that you have been able to find in connecting to each other. And yeah, just really grateful for you sharing today. So thank you so much, everybody. If you would like to join Nina as a member or check out our localization hub and other webinars that we have run on this topic, please do so. Otherwise, yeah, thanks so much for joining. And yeah, we'll see you in the Nina space again soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having us. Bye.
Many thanks. Many thanks.
Thanks, everyone.